So at the beginning of the season, we broke down all of our exotic changes that we received. We even looked at some reworks individually and even re-reviewed weapons that are just straight up hot this season due to our artifact mods. Today though, I want to circle back to a set of weapons that received reworks this season, our class exotic glaives. We did a video on these last season going over the changes and theorizing on whether these reworks would be enough. Now, since the season launch, it's probably to nobody's surprise, nobody has been using these glaives. But today we're going to be doing a complete breakdown on all three of these to figure out if any of these glaives are now worth your time. Now, first, we need to cover all the changes that all glaives received, just in case you may have forgotten. Bungie increased projectile speed by 30%. They also increased projectile damage in PvE by 25% and decreased projectile damage inside of PvP. Now, the increase in projectile speed was done so that Impulse Amplifier wasn't a must-have perk. Although I will say, PvP players, Impulse Amplifier, in my opinion, is still a must. However, I will mention that glaives do in fact feel better without the use of Impulse Amplifier, especially when we talk our exotic glaives here. Now, we're not going to really touch on PvP, especially considering Bungie decreased the damage inside of PvP. Instead, though, we're going to talk about PvE, because that's the big kicker. We've got a 25% buff here to our projectile damage. Now, just for a point of reference, pre-patch, adaptive glaives were hitting at 22,360 damage. But here at Carl, it's now hitting 27,249 damage. Now, we mentioned this archetype because this is exactly the archetype our Titan exotic glaive Edge of Action falls under. Now, rapid fires used to hit for 18,061 damage, and now they hit for 21,946, which is exactly what our Hunter exotic glaive Edge of Concurrence is. And aggressive frame glaives previously hit for 24,940 damage and now hit for 31,065 damage, which is what our Warlock exotic glaive Edge of Intent is. I know most of you are probably like, Cross, I didn't even know they were in different archetypes. They are, but let's be frank, whether you knew that or not, it didn't matter. Now, some of the quality of life changes that all glaives received include a reduction to the delay after firing before you can melee from 0.75 seconds down to 0.2 seconds. Now, we actually used the glaive the other day in trials in one of our build battle videos, and yeah, you can use them. And the follow-up melee hit does in fact work if you're not getting pooped on by conditional finality, that is. Now, lastly, shield energy now recharges passively. This was a big change, especially for our exotic glaives. When the glaive is held, that shield recharge rate is 1% per second. Now, I know, to most of us, these reworks seem very minor, but overall, glaives do feel better, more intuitive, more fluid to use, with our aggressive frame glaives still being that clunky archetype, but that's mostly due to their inherent low handling. Now, right away, these changes already make our class exotic glaives feel better. The question is going to come up, why would you even use them over a legendary glaive? Glaives can feel good all day, but if there's nothing that benefits you using them, then why bother? Which takes us to the individual buffs Bungie gave to each of these exotic glaives. And again, the reason why we wanted buffs to these glaives, at one time, we had 3 exotic swords that were class specific back inside of D1. Dark Drinker, Raise Lighter, and Boltcaster. Needless to say, guys, the bar was already high when it came to melee class specific exotic weapons. And with the glaives being the new archetype of weapons back in Witch Queen, I expected a lot more from these weapons. And you know what? They all came out mid as hell. Probably even worse than mid. Useless. Now, one of the big changes Bungie did make to these exotic glaives, though, is that when their exotic perk is activated, it grants you 1 ammo. So you're able to use these glaives even if you're out of ammo. Additionally, they also no longer passively drain shield energy when you perform a special reload to activate the perk. And the exotic perk is no longer deactivated when you reload or stow your glaive. Now let's start with our Warlock's exotic glaive, Edge of Intent. We have the exotic perk, Restorative Turret. When weapon energy is full, consume it before firing to make your next shot deploy a healing turret on impact. Now, Bungie updated this by changing the effect of the healing turret projectiles to grant cure and provide restoration instead of the old generic healing it used to have. They also increased the AoE radius to 8 meters, and the glaive's magazine size was increased from 4 to 5. Now, let me just say, in low to mid-tier content, glaive is actually pretty solid. I know, it's wild to even say that. The healing is kind of nice, and if you get some of the energy back while your turret is out, you can put down these healing turrets fairly frequently. I was running it here in Coil, and even though this is not necessarily the most difficult content in the game, when you start getting to tier 3 and 4, things get challenging, and it held up well, at least until about tier 4. At that point, the healing turrets weren't doing that much for me, and you're probably going to want to well as well. Overall, though, as a support and utility exotic, it's not a bad option. And paired with something like Quarantine Armlets, this gave me extra healing on melee kills, which was quite nice. But if you aren't a fan of the glaive playstyle, then it becomes quite restrictive to your overall build, which has me asking the question, where in our current sandbox would I use this glaive? Especially in in-game content when Well of Radiance already exists. And considering this is a Warlock exclusive explosive exotic, that point is amplified even more. And yeah, sure, you can use this on a different subclass, but let's be real. Most of my warlocks out there don't know how to use anything but Well of Radiance. And for good reason. For right now though, I don't see a reason to use this exotic glaive yet. The question I have, how will this pair with future weapons, most notably the future archetype that Bungie's going to be giving us in the final shape, which is those auto rifles that you can use to shoot at your teammates to heal them? Well, we kind of get a glimpse of that, as you can already dip into that healing playstyle fantasy right now. You can spec out Lumina and Boots of the Assembler, and you can just go complete healer for your fire team. But as I'm sitting here using this, I'm wondering, do I really need Edge of Intent? Could I just accomplish everything I'm trying to accomplish with Boots of the Assembler and Lumina all on its own? Now moving on, we have our Titan Exotic Glaive Edge of Action. This comes with the perk Remote Shield. When weapon energy is full, consume it before firing to make your next shot deploy a protective shield on impact. Now in terms of the changes this received, passing through the bubble now grants bonus reload speed, handling, and a small amount of stacking bonus damage in addition to the overshield. Now the bonus damage here is only 5%. This is extra damage, guys. And for the glaive itself, this is extra free damage on top of the buff it already received. Now our bubble here did receive a nerf. Bungie reduced the health of the bubble itself. And this is to counter the increase in uptime and those improved effects. Previously though, it had 8,000 HP and now it has 2,400, which is actually less than that, as Bungie noted in the last TWAB before the holidays, that the health of the bubble generated by Edge of Action is lower than intended. So where does this exotic fit into the sandbox? Well, it's not bad either here, guys. Thanks to the buffs to our glaive shield regeneration, buffs to damage, and generating that 1 ammo when activating our perk, you can spam out these little bubbles pretty often, which is nice, even at their current health pool, although that should be getting better at some point. Now, this also synergizes with Helm of Saint 14. You want to pop one of these bubbles up, you can blind enemies who walk through the bubble, which is fantastic if you're trying to lock down a spawn point. Now, unfortunately, I kind of have the same opinion as I did for warlocks, so I don't really see a good use case for this exotic in any of our high-end activities. Dude, we're already just trying to figure out how to make bubble more viable in in-game content, much less these little mini bubbles. I guess something that is nice though is that you can utilize this on a class outside of Void. And this had me wondering if I can get away with the double special nerf. I can utilize this with Banner of War and a 1-2 punch shotgun. The downside is that this glaive is an exotic, so I can't use Tractor here. Currently right now though, I just find that Edge of Action is just all right. I tried to duplicate the bug a while back where when shattering stasis crystals within this bubble would substantially increase your damage. This is for your stasis supers. I couldn't get it to work, but I'm still gonna try to make that happen. But again, even if I do get that bug to work, number one, that's very situational, and number two, none of the changes that were handed out to Edge of Action had any effect on that. So that's unfortunately where we stand with this glaive right now. But this takes us to our final glaive. Hunters, you have Edge of Concurrence. This has the perk Lightning Seeker. When weapon energy is full, consume it before firing to make your next shot track targets across the ground and unleash chain lightning on impact. Now in terms of its changes, Lightning Seekers now jolt targets on impact, meaning it can also stun overload champions. But Bungie said in the changes that they reduced the direct hit of Lightning Seeker to account for the free ammo granted. I ran Coil with Trident Vice, which got a buff by the way, with this exotic glaive. And this was probably the most fun I've had with all glaives this season. Granted, upon reaching tier 3 or 4, if you aren't able to keep that shield up and continue to dish out damage, probably gonna die. This also brings into focus so many other exotic weapons that are arc that already do so good. Trinity Ghoul, Wrist Runner, Centrifuge. Your uptime with Edge of Concurrence is much higher now, but on something like Trinity, I probably would just be able to accomplish that same exact thing, but with unlimited ammo and more build flexibility overall, minus the jolts, which I really do like, but there are ways around that if you're looking to stun overloads. On top of that, we have sidearms like Indebted Kindness, which can roll with bolt shots. It's hard choosing Edge of Concurrence over so many other options, which brings us to our conclusion. Are these exotic glaives better? Yeah. Are they meta though? No. During our initial testing, I noted that these are all feeling pretty good, and that's still true, but it's still difficult for us to try to find a practical use for these glaives. I'm trying, fellas. I really am, but I just haven't found the spot in the sandbox where I'm like, yes, this is the place. This is the place that I break out one of these class exotic glaives. Now, I will say this. If you already like glaives and you were already playing with one of these exotic glaives and you're already a fan of this, then yeah, you're gonna love these changes. But at this point, considering where these glaives are, if Bungie doesn't continue amping these up even more, my question is, why do we keep them class specific? Why? Why not bring Edge of Concurrence over to my Arc Warlock with Arc Soul Nades? Why not allow my Hunter to pop a bubble down with Edge of Action? I know that's part of the class identity, but none of these are overpowered, and none of them would be overpowered in the hands of our other classes. And if anything, that would add way more interest to these exotic glaives. We're 2 years deep, or nearly 2 years deep, into using these exotic glaives. None of them have ever been meta or anywhere remotely near being game break. I would love to see different classes being able to pick up all 3 of these glaives. To be an Arc Warlock with Geomags, jolting targets and creating unnamed traces, being a Solar Titan, casting out healing turrets with Edge of Intent, or a Void Hunter, deploying that mini Titan bubble, go invis, get to your friend to get his res, place a bubble on top of him. To me, guys, that is the next evolution of these exotic glaives. So there it is, fellas. That is our review. Let me know in the comments below what you think. Would you also like to see these exotic glaives no longer class specific? Would love to know your thoughts. Fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
Slap that like button like your mama told you right.